Welcome back, Doug. You all know who he is. He doesn't need an introduction. This is Doug Brignole. We have him back to address a lot of questions you guys have, a lot of things that need just more clarity, perhaps. They need to be more clearly defined, because as you guys know, when you know the exact how and why of something, your belief in it is 100-fold better, and you just do it with full on, pedal to the metal, no second guessing, nothing. That's why I think education is so important when it comes to fitness. But let's just go ahead and dig right into it, Doug. This is something I haven't got into with you before, actually, but what are your thoughts on stretching? When is there a best way to stretch? Is there, just like there's a best way to exercise every muscle, is it simply the reverse to stretch that muscle? How frequently should you stretch? And what's that have to do with your posture? Stretching in general.
I don't think you could get a definitive answer on this from anyone. I've read a lot of articles from a lot of people that claim expertise. I'm sure there's lots of people that never ever stretch and they don't ever have a consequence for it. And there's lots of people that stretch on a regular basis that maybe still have problems they had before. There's probably some people that maybe resolved some problems with stretching. But again, I just don't think there's a definitive thing for this. I'm lucky enough in the sense that I've got a client that I stretch with as her 3 times weekly exercise plan. So for me, that works. That's perfect. I mean, 3 times a week of stretching with her is satisfactory for my, stretching needs. We stretch quadriceps, hamstrings, inner thigh, glutes, calves, rear deltoids, all that, neck. I'm not a huge proponent of it in terms of saying, if you don't do it, here's the consequence. I think it's the kind of thing that it will make you feel better. There's no doubt of that. And if you do it, regularly, you will feel better. Will you grow bigger muscles? No, I don't think you'll grow bigger muscles. Will it fix your posture? If you have bad posture, I don't think it will fix your posture. It might help it a little bit, but I don't think it'll cause someone to go from really slumped shoulders to perfectly straight shoulders, because so much of that has to do with habit and maybe even genetics, and maybe, whether or not those muscles are even strong enough. A lot of people think that if they work the muscles that pull their shoulders back, that will automatically fix their posture. And I would say, well, if you think that, then what you're actually thinking is that because you've strengthened those muscles are going to be tight, contracted all the time, and pulling them back for you. It's like, no, if you look at someone with good posture and you go up to their back and you poke their back, their muscles aren't tense. That's just their habit. That's just their natural, relaxed standing position. You've got to learn how to stand that way and make that a regular part of your habit to the degree that your genetics allows you. But I've seen some people with such bad skeletal genetics that there's just no way they could ever get good posture.
If I could interject, just something I actually advocate stretching a lot is I see stretching necessary tons of times when it comes to running and jogging. And the reason for that is if you have super tight hamstrings, you can't actually run or jog efficiently. So you do actually have to stretch those. Rarely does it seem to interfere with much else. Sometimes tight calves will interfere with things, but I don't know too much else you need to be doing the stretching for, except for obviously for those of you who follow my respiratory bit, you do have to obviously stretch your vertebrae and such for improving breathing function. But that's my 2 cents on the matter.
I saw one study where they wanted to see whether or not people who stretched, athletes who stretched, incurred injury less often than people who didn't stretch. And they found that it didn't. There was no less incident of injury. What they did find makes a difference in injury reduction is warming up the body. So if you're a football player or track and field or whatever your sport happens to be, the best thing you can do is probably jog beforehand. Just elevate your body temperature, get the blood circulating. That's going to probably reduce injury risk more than stretching. The thought that stretching is going to reduce the injury would only make sense if you think the injuries are happening as a result of muscles being too tight. I don't think anyone's conclusively said the reason why injuries happen is because muscles are too tight. I don't think that's the case. And you certainly don't want to stretch before exercise anyway. You want to stretch after exercise when things are warm. So yeah, it's one of those things where, I find myself stretching my quadricep in the middle of the day because it feels good to do that. But I would not say that I expect my quadriceps to get bigger or that I expect me to have like better athletic performance because I do that now and then. I just know that I feel better when I do it.
I think that kind of goes to just, more comfort level, I guess. If a muscle is starting to feel tight, you just stretch it out, it feels better. I mean, it's just kind of the benefits of it are, I don't want to say debatable, because obviously if you're able to do a front split or able to do you have to do these things, then you have to stretch to do them. So those are benefits for specific things. I recently saw that you did a video about your 3-a-day training sets. Looks really cool. Thanks for doing that, by the way. But would you tell us your personal sets, reps, and weights? Not necessarily go into detail, but just kind of how you judge them, why you judge them to be that way, how you schedule them in your week, and I mean, guess what you would advocate for somebody who's a bodybuilder, what they should do.
Yeah, right. Okay. Just so we have a little context. When I was training in the 80s, which was right around the time that Arnold Schwarzenegger and Frank Zane and all those guys were, still training at Gold's Gym and still competing, the conventional wisdom was a 3-way split. 1/3 the body on Monday, 1/3 on Tuesday, 1/3 on Wednesday, repeat Thursday, Friday, Saturday, off on Saturday. That was pretty much what everybody was doing. The thing that was different back then was that everyone thought you had to do multiple exercises for each muscle. So I can't imagine how we did it actually, because the idea of doing 1/3 of your body and doing 15 sets for each of those muscles, we must have spent 5 hours in the gym. So shortly after that, the trend became a 4-way split, and then it became a 5-way split, which of course was justified by the belief that more sets and more weight was necessary for optimum gains. And if you're going to do that many sets per workout, then you can't do too many body parts in one workout in one day. So you have to stretch it out farther. And that automatically requires less frequency of a muscle getting worked. So that's what the trend was. Now, we might look at the guys that are taking heavy steroids and they're working on a body part once a week. And we might think, well, that obviously works. I'm going to do that. Maybe it only works for them because they're taking all the steroids. I don't know. All I know is that I gravitated toward that and I did not get great results. But the problem that I had, and the problem that probably anybody who's older would have, is making the incorrect assumption that the reason why you're not getting good gains is because you're older, right? You're not getting good gains because you don't have the ideal workout, or at least the ideal frequency. You might have ideal exercise, but if you're not using the ideal frequency, then you're going to get a compromised benefit. If you're young, like 20 or 30 years old, you might not have the excuse of saying, I'm older, and so I better change something. But when you're older, you start thinking, well, maybe it's just, what happens when you're older. So I competed in 2019 at the age of 59, and I won the drug-free universe, but I was not entirely pleased with how I looked. I thought that I was a little bit too small. But I trained that way for a little bit afterwards. And then I thought, what, I'm just going to switch it up, because I guess maybe I need to stop worrying about muscle size and worry more about health. So I thought I would just do a 3-way split, a full body workout, full body Monday, full body Wednesday, full body Friday. And this do cardio on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And if I lose muscle, so what? My heart will thank me for it, I said. So I went from doing 12 sets a muscle group to 2 sets per muscle group, but all the muscle groups in one day. That's about an hour and a half workout. It's about 20 exercises. So it's about a little over 40 sets. And I started to grow, which was pretty shocking to me because it was only 2 sets. But because it was only 2 sets, I also sort of felt like I'd like to do more than 2 sets, although I don't want to go back to where I was. What if I just do 4 sets, 3 or 4, but let's just say 4 sets, and putting all the muscle groups in one day, I divided it into 3 days. So that's what I've been doing. And I've been getting like insanely good results. I'll tell you what the moral of the story is here in just a second. So I do 6 exercises on day 1, which is 6 different muscles, 6 exercises on day 2, another 6 muscles, 8 exercises on day 3, another 8 muscles. So 1 exercise per muscle, 4 sets for each. And before I move into how many reps, I'll tell you a little context. They did a study that suggested anyway, that you could get equal amount of muscle growth using high reps versus low reps. High reps, lighter weight, low reps, heavier weight. And specifically, the range was 30 reps to 6 reps, 30 reps with a weight equivalent to 40% of your 1 rep max, 6 reps with a weight equivalent to 80% of your 1 rep max. The growth, although it was equal, was by way of a different mechanism, which means that you had to take the lighter sets to failure, but you did not take the heavier sets to failure. The first, second, third rep of a 6 rep set are all productive because the weight is heavy. And so you get high fiber recruitment. Over here, you don't get high fiber recruitment until the muscle is thoroughly exhausted. So now I knew about that study 2 or 3 years ago. And that's a misleading study, because what I thought was, well, if you get equal growth with both types of sets, with which type of those 2 sets can you do more sets? Well, I can do a lot more sets of low rep sets than I can high rep, because you do high rep, you burn out. And so that made me think, I call it greedy, but it's not unusual for a person to say, okay, well, if this is good, how can I get better? How can I get more? Right. So, if 2 sets of high reps to failure is good and 2 reps of low reps heavy is good, then how about if I do 8 sets or 10 sets or 12 sets of heavy, right? So the problem with that thinking is that you end up having to do less frequency, and that screws the whole thing up. So what I've learned is that frequency is key. That frequency is something that you almost have to lay down first and then lay everything down around it, right? So Chris Beardsley, who's a researcher, asked a very good question, a theoretical question, which of course he was intent on answering. And that was, in order to determine the ideal frequency of a workout, what does a muscle have to recover from before it's ready for another workout? And he identified 3 factors. One of those 3 factors recovers within hours of the workout. Another one recovers after about 12 to 15 hours. Another one recovers after about 30 to 40 hours. So 48 hours every other day, he surmised, would be the ideal frequency. Now, the part that's left out of that equation, which I think, can't be left out of the equation because it's really important, is how many sets did you do? What kind of intensity did you do that A, allowed you to recover in only 2 days? And B, what if you do more? What's the negative? What if you do less? Should you work at every muscle every day? And all these things. So the other thing that you have to say is, what if I don't work a muscle every other day? What's the consequence? Well, we know what working a muscle once a week does. That's clearly not good. I can tell you firsthand. But where in between every other day and once every 7 days is the good and the bad, right? So let's start off with saying, what happens if you do once every 3rd day, twice a week, Monday and Thursday, let's say. If you did actually lose a little something because you waited an extra day, the question is, how much did you lose? The other question is, how much did you gain in terms of sustainability? So if you can figure out, ascertain, determine conclusively that it is better to work a muscle every other day, what happens if you can't sustain that? What if I do that and after a month I'm burnt out, right? Didn't do you any good that you got good gains, because now you got to stop for a week or two, whatever. So let's just take a hypothetical. When we work out, we start at the baseline, and then the strength of that muscle, the thickness of that muscle dips down, and then it starts to rise back up again, and it crosses that baseline and starts this thing called the supercompensation phase. It rises in size and strength, and then it reaches a peak, and then it starts to come back down again. That's why if you wait too long, it's like you're starting from square one all over again. Seems to me that process is about a week to 10 days. If you wait a week to 10 days to work that muscle again, you're pretty much starting over again every time. Certainly if you wait every 2 weeks, then it's a disaster. The question is, how soon does that thing drop off? If a person were to theoretically think that it's good to work a muscle every other day, but bad to work it every third day, you would have to believe that that peak just drops off a cliff. I don't think anything drops off a cliff ever, right? So that's just not the way the body works. It must go up, and it must either start a slow decline or hover there for a day before it starts to decline. So I right away embrace this idea of twice a week, because there's no doubt that you can sustain that better. So unless I was disappointed with the kind of muscle gains I was getting, then I was going to stay with this twice a week thing. Now, 4 sets is the number of sets that the most number of sets that you can actually do with high intensity and still be able to do every twice a week. If you use more intensity than that, it's going to force you to take longer rest time. So you can't justify doing more sets, quote unquote, stimulating that muscle more, if it requires less frequency, because frequency happens to be pretty much the most important thing. So you need to select the frequency that allows you to do twice a week. Bottom line. If that's 2 sets for you, it's 2 sets. If it's 3 sets, it's 3 sets. For me, it's 4. Now you might say, I can do 5, I can do 6. I would say, let me see those 5 or 6 sets. Let's see what they look like.
Exactly.
Right? If you're doing 5 or 6 sets, the way I'm doing my 4 sets, more power to you, but I doubt it. Right? So what happens more often than not is people fall into this little trap of thinking more sets is better, and don't realize that what they've done is they've compromised the intensity of each of those sets so that they can survive 5 or 6 sets. That's not a good strategy. It's really not a good strategy. You're better off with fewer sets.
I was gonna say, it's what everyone seems to do is they go to the gym, they got whatever plan that they're on, this kind of half-baked thing that they're on. So it's 3 sets of 10, and they're like, well, this is going to be hard, so I need to conserve my energy to make sure I get all of those. And you can't do the intensity and time, they're inversely related. You can't be super intense, and you can't also have that for a long time. It's one or the other. You burn the glucose out, you break the fibers. What are you going to do next?
Yeah. The other thing that you have to ask yourself is, we know that intensity, fatigue, proximity to failure, drastically boost muscle growth. They have to be there. The less they're there, the less muscle growth you'll get. Question is, how much is too much? Right? So humans have a tendency, especially competitive humans, have a tendency to think that more is always better. So you might think that, okay, fine, I'm going to do Doug's 4-set routine, but I'm going to just blitz these. I'm going to do breakdown sets, and well, again, if you can't recover from that with 3 days, then it's not going to work for you. So that means that we need to think of exercise, or a set of exercise, as a dose, like a pill. Like you take this pill, but it has to have the right dose. It can be too much. It can be too little, but it can be too much. Right? So intensity is good, but crazy intensity is not especially good and not necessary. So what I typically do is on my first of 4 sets, and by the way, I use, lighter weight, higher reps, moving toward lower reps, higher weight. So 30, 20, 15, 10 ballpark. And of course, you start with a lighter weight and you add and you add and you add and you add. So for my first set, I usually use about 85% of maximum effort. That translates to about 3 reps left in reserve before you put the weight down. So let's just say you're planning on doing a 30 rep set. By the time you get to your 30th rep, you can guess that maybe you could have done 33 reps, maybe 34 reps with a lot of difficulty and pain. That's the right intensity. Now, you know, what I just described will start to burn at around 20, 21, 22, 23. So what you have to do is you have to pay attention to what that muscle is saying to you. So let's just say that you pick up a weight, you think it's the right weight for 30 reps. You get to 30 reps, but you realize that you don't only have 3 reps left in reserve. You have at least 10, maybe 15 reps in reserve. Should you put the weight down just because the paper says 30 reps? Of course not. Take it to 40, take it to 41, take it to 42, take it to whatever you think will leave you with around 3 reps in reserve. That's the first set. You increase weight, another guesstimate, right? You're guessing that this weight will be the right weight to challenge you for 20 reps. If you're wrong and you fail at 17, no problem. But if you can do 25, 26, do 25, 26. The next set, your goal is 15. You pick the weight you think is going to be the right weight for that. If you end up getting 16 or 18 with it or 20 again, fine, no problem. Add weight, next set. If you can get 12 reps with it, 13 reps. So I always tell people, you have a plan, but be ready to depart from the plan. Your plan is 10 reps. When you get to 10, your muscle is talking to you. Can I do an 11th rep? Yes. I don't know about 12, but for the moment, I know I can do an 11th. Only after the 11th will you know if you can squeeze out a 12th. And only after the 12th will you know if you can squeeze out a 13th, because the situation is changing. It's fluid. It's changing as you go. And so that's when you have to start paying attention. You can't be robotic about this. And so I find that it's better to not even have music on. Pay attention. Think about what the muscle is feeling. Right now, there's going to be a time, all of us get to this point where we say, okay, I just did a set. Let's say I did my 4th set and I did decline dumbbell press and I used 45 pounds and I got 12 reps with it. And you think, would it have been better if I'd used the 50-pound weight for 10 reps or 9 reps? Would it have been better? No. Would it have been as good? Maybe as good, but not better. So don't fret that you did 12 reps with a 45-pound dumbbell and that you blew it. You should have. There is no definitive advantage to using a heavier weight in terms of muscle growth. The muscle is not going to grow according to the 5 more pounds. It's going to go according to what it felt, what it experienced. If it felt intensity, you're at 12 reps, 13 reps, you're failing at 12 and 13, you're already under 30 reps. So you're already qualifying for an amount of weight that is adequate for growth. Now just milk it, right? You're going to get the same growth with the 12 than you would have with the 16, than you would have with the 9 with a heavier weight. So now the differentiating factor is, can I use the best control, the best form, the best safety? If I use the 50, will it start to strain the joint a little bit? Is that worth it, even though I didn't have any muscle gain advantage from it? No, absolutely, it's not worth it. So this is the conversation you have to have with yourself when you're moving through the workout. And 4 sets of this kind of intensity will really make you sweat. I mean, it is so intense that you will probably dread the next set. You're like, oh God, here he goes. So you have to psych up, right? So, and then you go to the next body part and you do the next 4, and the next body part, you do the next 4. By the time you're done with your 6 muscle groups, if you've done it right and you're not quite acclimated to it yet, don't be surprised if you're a little bit hypoglycemic, if you're a little bit nauseous, If you're really, really wiped out, right, go home and freshen up, drink some water, maybe, have a protein drink, maybe a banana, and recover. Eventually, you'll feel less and less hypoglycemic. But that is what it takes. You can't walk away from a workout like this without having sweated if you're doing it right. And then that combination twice a week, I feel like it's just the winning formula. The right exercise, the right intensity, the right frequency, bingo.
If I could, just because I think you just opened a couple things that are really interesting topics to speak on, would be when we're talking about feeling the muscle, all these things about feeling. Muscles don't have brains, and also they don't know how they're being loaded. All they know is that they're being loaded. Would you mind speaking and clarifying that for people who think that you have to squat so-called heavy weight with a squat, a deadlift? Muscles don't care how they're loaded; they just want to be loaded. Could you just speak on that?
So most of us, some more than others, have been brainwashed. Have had a lot of people telling us, we've been reading that the more weight you lift, the better. The more weight you lift, the more the muscle grows. Well, I just explained why the 50-pound dumbbell isn't going to give you more growth than the 45-pound dumbbell, all things being equal in terms of intensity. So that's not true. But when you're doing any particular exercise, every exercise has a mechanical profile. And that involves the angle of those limbs relative to the direction of resistance, whether it's gravity or a cable or whatever. And then that turns into percentages of load. Okay, so in the simplest of terms, any lever, any limb that is parallel to gravity or parallel to whatever the direction of resistance is, if it's a cable. So we're talking about free weight gravity, we're talking about vertical, because gravity is vertical. If you were to go up to somebody who's standing with a 400-pound barbell on their back and they're about to squat, but they haven't started squatting yet, they're just standing there and their lower legs are vertical, their upper legs are vertical, their torso, you can tap them on the quadricep and it's relaxed. It's not loaded yet. It's not activated yet. And that's because regardless of the 400 pounds, the limb that is being operated by the quadriceps is in the neutral position. Same with the limb that's operated by the gluteus, right? So as that person starts to descend and those limbs start to veer from the neutral position, they start to increase the load to their appropriate muscle, but in percentages. It's not an on or off switch. It's not black and white, right? So it's not like off, on. It's off, on a little bit, on more. It's like a dimmer switch, right? So it gets brightest when it's horizontal. It's half as bright, half as on when it's halfway between neutral and maximum, right? Generally speaking. So when you look at an illustration that says, here's this person squatting and the quads are red and the glutes are red, it's like, well, you're making it look like it's just on or off. It's not on or off. It's degrees of on, right? Now, if you're going to load a particular muscle, let's just hypothetically choose a weight of just say 90 pounds. A muscle is experiencing 90 pounds of resistance in a particular exercise. It doesn't have eyes. It doesn't have ears. It can't see what you're doing. It only knows that it is challenged with 90 pounds of resistance. It could be 90 pounds being 30% of 300 pounds you're lifting. It could be 90% of 100 pounds you're lifting. It doesn't know or care. Either way, it's 90 pounds. It's not going to grow more getting 90 pounds from the 300 pounds you're lifting as compared to the 90 pounds it would get with 100 pounds of lifting. It's only going to grow with the 90 pounds. That's all it cares about. That's all it knows. So the wisest strategy is to get the most amount of muscle load with the least amount of actual weight, because you use the smartest mechanics. It is foolish to select the exercise that allows you to lift 300 pounds just because you think 300 pounds is better, completely blind to the fact that it's still only 90 pounds to the muscle, 90 pounds to the muscle. So whenever you're dealing with a compound exercise, one, you're dealing with an exercise that's involved in the contribution of 3 or 4 muscles. In other words, we don't know how much, you don't know how much each one of those muscles is. All you know is the group of them with those particular angle of limbs relative to gravity allow you to lift, let's say 300 or 400 pounds. It's all you know. If you were to do the math, and you can do the math with what we teach, you can figure out that you're actually getting less quadricep load with that 300 pounds than you are with that, than that guy over there is with the body weight 60 squat, because of the mechanics, because of the physics.
And also,
the guy that's doing,
I mean, if I may, I mean, you should also speak on the fact that there's significantly less range of motion in the active, the actual moving lever during a squat as well. I mean, all of these things compromise the movement. The muscle, again, it doesn't know, it just knows it's a lacking range of motion, all these things.
right. So what I always say is, look, let's start off with the basic understanding that when you're doing a compound movement, let's just say 3 muscles are working. They're working with a certain amount of load that may or may not be to their capacity, maybe less than their capacity, it might be more than their capacity. In other words, they might be getting overloaded. They're working with a certain amount of range of motion. They're working with a certain early or late phase loading. They're working with a certain amount. There's a lot of these factors that determine how much value, how much benefit that muscle is getting, right? So the question you should be asking is, if my quads are working during squats and my glutes are working during squats, how does that glute activation and that quad activation compare during that squat to what it would experience during that leg extension or that hip extension? And what you would realize once you break it all down, you get better quadricep activation with an isolated quadricep exercise than the quadricep experiences during a compound squat, for all of these 16 reasons. Same thing with the glutes, right? So that's why we have these 16 factors that we use sort of as a reference. Some of them are mechanical, some of them are anatomical, some of them are neurological, and they tell you whether or not this particular exercise rates high, medium, low on that scale. And all you should be worried about, if you really want to have the wisest strategy, your goal should be to make sure that each muscle of your body is optimally stimulated during its workout. When you realize that it's unlikely to happen when it's participating in a compound movement, the idea that you're saving time because you're working 3 muscles, that goes out the window, right? You have to ask yourself, is this muscle working as best as it can work? Most people will tell you, yeah, I do the squat because it saves time, but oh, by the way, I also do a second quadricep exercise and a second glute exercise. Well, then why do you do that? In other words, I save time by only doing the isolate and skipping this one because I get all I need from this quad and this gluteus exercise. Don't waste time on the one that's going to give you a compromised benefit.
I'm just going back to the range of motion real quick. It just occurred to me. Another thing I get all the time is isometric contractions. So a couple of things about them. Number one, as you well know, in a ton of different exercises, you'll feel an isometric contraction in your abs, for example. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the abs are working. I mean, the obvious example would be the hanging leg raise. Obviously, you will feel an isometric contraction in your abs, but that doesn't mean that they're being targeted efficiently. And also, again, people will just say, yeah, but I feel the muscle. Doesn't that mean it's working? I feel it. Could you just speak on that for a moment?
Yeah. All right. Let's start with just this. If I put my hands together like this and I push them together and I contract my pectoral muscles, I can feel that, right? And if I try to hold that with maximum pressure for 60 seconds or 90 seconds, I can tell you my pecs are going to scream. And I can tell you that the next day my pecs may actually be sore. But it doesn't take much to realize that that's not a good way to build your pecs, right? So there's no doubt that you can feel burn with an unproductive exercise and you can get soreness with an unproductive exercise. Okay, there's no doubt of that. Okay, so we know, I mean, studies have shown time and time again that dynamic exercise, also known as isotonic exercise, optimally stretching that muscle and contracting that muscle, letting the actin filaments slide over each other, that's what causes muscle growth. That's what optimally strengthens muscle. So that means that anytime you're doing an exercise that is causing you to feel a burn, you need to ask, am I feeling the burn because it's isometric, or am I feeling the burn because it's dynamic? If it's because it's dynamic, good. If it's dynamic because it's isometric, not good. Okay, so the hanging leg raise is a good example. The abs do not connect to the legs. They don't even touch the leg bones, the femurs, right? They go from the rib cage to the pubic bone or the pelvis. They don't cross the hips. So when you're watching somebody doing a leg raise, clearly what you're seeing the greatest movement is in the hip flexion and the knees rising, and that isn't the abs doing the work. So several questions, logical questions you should ask is, why do I feel it in my abs? And is that thing I'm feeling in my abs productive? The reason you're feeling it in your abs is because when you bring your legs forward, your tailbone wants to kick back. And so the abs are tense to keep that from happening. They're maintaining the posture of the spine while another muscle does the work. So if you think that's beneficial, then you would have to call standing barbell curls a lower back exercise, because without your lower back, you would fall forward, right? It's not a lower back exercise because they're only holding tension. They're only isometric. The biceps are doing the work because they're getting the dynamic work. You can't call an exercise, let's say for the lower back or the abs, an exercise for that, if it has the lesser role in that exercise. In fact, a significantly lesser role, so much so that it's almost not even worth mentioning, right? So the thing about the leg raise is even more inappropriate or counterproductive, because what is raising the legs primarily is one of the hip flexors called the psoas. And the psoas originates on the lumbar spine. And so when you raise your leg up, the reason why your tailbone wants to kick back, it's because it's pulling your lumbar spine forward and it's making you arch, right? So there's no way that you can actually get a full abdominal contraction, meaning let your spine round, bring your rib cage as close to the pelvis as possible, if the hip flexors are pulling the spine in the opposite direction. They're trying to arch your back, right? So you're having a tug of war with these two muscles, and neither one actually gets what it wants. Now, you could say, well, as long as the muscle is working, as long as it's fatiguing, then isn't that benefit? Well, there is such a thing as more benefit and less benefit. Isometric tension has some benefit, but you're really wasting time and wasting energy, because you could be doing just the one better exercise and getting a better result. Now, it's even more ridiculous when someone puts an ankle weight and then does a hanging leg raise with the ankle weight. Now what they've done is they're pulling on their lumbar spine harder. They're making it more impossible for the abdominal muscle to get full contraction. So it just doesn't make any sense. This is why it's so important to understand the why of things, right?